Hey,
Hello, hello.
we did it. I
We
gotta
totally did.
say, one of my favorite parts about this whole going live thing is being able to see you during the countdown, like in the background, right? Because I can't hear you, but I can see you. So like I always like play this own narration in my head while you're like looking for the thing. And in my head, I'm like, where's my dog? I've lost my puppy. Is it flying? Like I just don't know. It's fun. It's a good time.
It's me making sure, like, did I close anything that could bing bong during the show? This is my first time using this mic. Is it high enough? Shit, it's not. I gotta put something else low to like lift it up. Is that light gonna fall over? Maybe it will.
I hope so. I mean, that's what we were discussing when you got here. It was like the ring light fell over and things were happening and everything was janky. And I very calmly and lovingly reminded you that you chose to come on a show called What Could Go Wrong, and then to discuss why you're unqualified. So I have zero sympathy for you and your shenanigans. And I hope your ring light falls because that would be just fantastic. Not breaks. I don't hope that on you, but falling would be fun.
You know what? I wouldn't mind if it breaks, then I could justify buying a new one. Because I've had a few people ask me what ring light I would recommend, and I don't know what to recommend, but I know which one not to get. And my response to that is like, don't get this brand. It is shit. It breaks. And now what happened right before the show is it fell over, and now it's this janky. It could fall over. I don't know. We'll see.
That'd make for a fun gift. I feel like that'd be a fun gift. Just
It falling over. Yes.
yeah, yeah. Well, welcome to the show, Rob, Mr. Rob, the king of coaches. I don't know. You do things, yes. I have referred to you in previous episodes as the friend that I pay to be my friend. So I have like Kevin and Jennifer, who are, you know, the friends that are my friend because they wrangled me into their situation. And then my third friend, which is the one that I pay to be my friend. But little did you know that once our like payment completes, you're stuck. So like, sorry.
I hope so. Well, that's part of the beauty of, I think, the kind of work that I get to do and the people that I choose to work with is they are people who I love speaking with and hanging out with and chatting with. So yeah, that there's no even need to bring that up. It's a want that I have as well, that you and I stay friends beyond the payment period.
Beyond the paid friend situation. So, I mean, I realized that my last episode with Joshua, we just kind of started the episode as if everybody knew who Joshua was and what he did with his life, because I don't know why they wouldn't, because he's a lovely human who everybody should, you know all the things about. But as I'm going into this one, I realize I should probably give you a chance to introduce yourself, to the people who aren't as cool as we are to hang out with us.
So my name is Rob Gilbert. I am a business coach and mentor, and I help people who are... Doggy. What's the doggy's name?
Charlie. I choked on my coffee. She scared me.
Hey, Charlie.
Please continue.
I help people take their deep desire to want to help others, make a difference, have some kind of impact-driven, purpose-driven life, and turn it into an actual business. Because the best coaches, in my opinion, are people that have been through stuff, have experienced some trauma, some changes, some transformation, some like life has smacked them around a bit, and they've come around on the other side, and now they want to extend their arm behind them and help other people on their journey. And these people are generally great at, being empathetic, holding space, listening, just making other people feel cared for and understood, but it doesn't necessarily translate to also good at building a business, at scaling a business. So those are the kind of people that I work with and I help with, whether it is launching a coaching business or growing one that already exists. And I have this passion, this deep passion for marketing and also for people. And that's also why before I was in my second career, I'm on career number 3. My second one was in people and culture and HR, because when done well, that is also the intersection of business and people. Because it doesn't matter how you treat the people. If the business isn't doing well, there is no jobs. But it's also really stupid to think that you can treat employees any which way and it's not going to affect the business, because people who feel like they're listened to, feel empowered, feel that they are learning and growing, feel that their voice makes a difference, those people are more innovative, productive. It's a much better environment. So anyway, I've been playing and living at this intersection of business and people for a long time.
I like it. I also will say, when you raised your hand and said that you were, your second job, I was like, Rob, this is a 3.
Third career. I said third career. I'm on my third career.
There was something about it too. It's fine. Don't worry about it. I got it. I'm all caught up now.
I'm on career number 3. This is third career.
Well, okay. So when I met you on Snark Squad, and it was because Jennifer knew you, maybe, or Kevin knew you. Like, I don't know how you ended up there, but they were like, Rob's coming on. And I'm like, Rob who? I don't know what you're saying. And I also have been pronouncing your last name wrong for all of this time. Say it again.
So there's different, how would you say it? Let me hear you say it. How would you say it first?
I was saying Gilbert.
That's good. That's a pass.
Okay, yes. What's a fail?
It is hard to fail at the way I've spelled it now, because that's not even my legal last name. That is a name that I changed when I went all in on this third career. So
okay. Wow.
That is not actually my name. So people who know me before I went all in on launching Growth Habit, on becoming this coach and mentor, on doing what I'm doing now, they see my name and they're like, that's not right. My legal last name is written Gilbert. And you would probably say something terrible like Gilbert.
I would absolutely say Gilbert, 100%. Yes.
But it is French. French is my mother tongue. And the proper pronunciation of that, if I'm saying it fully with like my French accent, it's Gilbert. But the way that an Anglophone who would say it, who's just trying, who knows it's French, who'd say Gilbert.
Okay, so this whole Gilbert thing is blowing my mind, because my dad, whose family is French, his middle name is Gilbert. So tell me again what his middle name actually is.
Gilbert.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna call him that later.
Gilbert, I'm cool with it. I'm cool with the way you were thinking my name is pronounced. That's cool.
It's fine. It's fine. So okay, so I met you. And I was like, he seems fun. What does he do? And I had like this super secret thing that I wanted to do, like this coaching thing, right? Mm-hmm. But I didn't talk about it because, crazy idea. Crazy. And so I was like, I need to talk to Rob G. I'm going to call you Rob G because that seems easier. And I was like, I'm going to talk to him. And we chatted for a little bit. And I remember when I was talking with you about like wanting to do this super secret coaching thing, and you had me first kind of explain what I did to you, what I've done up to this point, where I was talking about, I had a job and then I lost my job. So I started my consulting business, and then I was doing that. And I'm working in international companies and legislative review and with CEOs and doing strategic planning, blah, 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 like normal, no big deal, daily stuff. And you were like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, I want to help people like step into their power and be who they want to be and like take on the world as ever who they are instead of what other people tell them they want to be. And your response was like, and that's the crazy part like of what you're saying? And I was like, yes. I don't know what you're confused about. That is absolutely the crazy part.
And to me, it was just like, you're talking about doing legislative review, working with people all over the place, and you're doing all these different things, and you've gotten jobs when you didn't have the credentials, and you've just like bucked all the trends and done all the things when you were completely unqualified based on other people's perspective, and still living this like, and then you're like, and I want to take this passion I have for helping other people, and one of my gifts is making people feel understood and asking questions as a way to be able to influence change. But the idea of saying publicly that I want to do that seems crazy. Yeah, to me, that I was like, no, that's definitely not the crazy thing. That's already what's happening. You just want to make it formal.
So you, sir, are the reason that everybody on LinkedIn has had to listen to me talk about qualified versus unqualified for the past 2 weeks. So if anybody has a problem or is annoyed with this concept still happening, find Rob G. Send him a DM, like tell him that he is the problem for all of these things happening. Because it's so accurate. But okay, we know that I'm unqualified. I've discussed it over and over. But before we kind of get into like why you're unqualified to do all the things that you do, it's been really interesting. I've talked with Jennifer Ariel, and Joshua so far. And if you have missed any of those, I put the link and you can find them on YouTube or whatever. But they've all been very different conversations, honestly, because like when I first started this with Jennifer, in my mind, I'm thinking there's only really so many ways to address this qualified versus unqualified thing. Eventually the conversation is going to get stale and we've already said all the things. But it has taken a different turn with every person that I've had on the show, which has made it so interesting because there's so much depth to this concept of qualified versus unqualified. And last week with Joshua, he was discussing like how he is Puerto Rican, but he was not raised in a family because his mother passed away and he did not have his father that was Puerto Rican. So he almost doesn't feel qualified to be Puerto Rican because he doesn't have that same like backstory and history and whatever. And I was like, what? That's a whole nother level of this like qualifier thing. So the part that we like kind of landed on and where I want to jump on into your conversation was the only qualifier is you, right? I mean, because then we were breaking down to the only qualifier to be a mom is to, you know, be a mom. The only qualifier to be straight is that you're straight. The only qualifier to be Puerto Rican is that you're Puerto Rican, right? And how odd it is that we all come back to like, I don't know if I'm qualified to be Puerto Rican, which when you say it like that sounds insane. Like you are Puerto Rican, so you are by default qualified to be that. But then here we are kind of like, I don't know if I've done all the things that allow me to really embrace that part of my life. And, you know, and he spoke to the fact of being queer and how that, you know, that type of thing, which I don't have that experience, mine's different, but just so interesting to me that there's pieces of us that are actually ingrained in us that we still don't feel qualified to have or to do. And like, it just blows my mind. I'm loving the depth of the conversation. So starting from there, I want to hear kind of about how, you know, unqualified you are to do the things that you like. What's your story on that?
I feel that when I was younger, I carried around this sense that because my parents were at a certain socioeconomic level and, you know, they were at a certain education level, that it meant that I was limited in what I could do and I only had certain ceilings. Same thing with my education. The fact that I don't have any legit post-secondary education, I thought it meant that I wasn't qualified to do certain things. I got to work at places like KPMG and Ernst & Young 15 years ago, and they had really strict rules around who gets in the door and who doesn't. Maybe at the time most recently where it came up in a non kind of linear or expected way is when I was in my people and culture roles, working in HR, working in those kinds of places, and I was leading diversity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives, diversity, inclusion, and equity initiatives, because I was the head of people and culture. My job was to care about the people and the culture of the organizations. And I'm a tall, white, straight man with a one-syllable name. Like the amount of things I have going for me that give me additional privilege points are off the charts.
Yeah.
And it made me question, like, who am I? Am I allowed to talk about this? Am I allowed to speak up for others? Am I going to say the wrong thing? Is someone going to say that, who am I to say it? But I'm an empathetic person who deeply cares about other people, who's able to put themselves in other people's shoes, who has been, when I was younger, I was singled out for being like French. I had people, you know, throw rocks at me, call me names. Sure, I haven't lived the same experiences as someone else, but definitely, like, there's things I can relate to. So I've had to get through it. And I think, I love hearing this story of Josh because, what does that mean? Like, other people, like, is there someone out there with like a ruler? Like, this is the scale of Puerto Ricanness.
Right.
Level 1, but you're not at level 6, and you're going to be at least a level 6 of Puerto Rican, or else you can't wear the badge.
Yeah. I mean, it's just how it speaks to how deeply ingrained, like, external qualifiers we look for, like that validation. We're looking for someone else to say, and who, I don't know, but someone else to say, sure, you can be Puerto Rican. Like, sure, you can be white. Sure, you can be queer. Like, who even says that? And again, if someone came up to us and said, sure, you can be, are they qualified to say that to us? Would we take it as, or would we say, that was just Rob. I really actually need this person to qualify that for me. Like, the amount of time we spend looking for external validation, like, is there ever an end? And I would say no, but I mean, maybe you do finally find that person that validates that for you, but like, is there an end to that road?
I don't know if there is. I think there's an interesting shift that's happening because I'm in my 40s. I turned 44 this year. So I remember pre-internet. I remember before there was like this free access to so much. And for centuries, for generations, we've been raised in a gatekeeper society where there is like one person or one group of people who have control of who gets access, who gets exposure, who gets who gets to play, who gets into the school, who gets. But now, now it's honestly, you can put your ideas up on YouTube and no one can stop you. You can publish a book. You can have a book available for sale on Amazon in 2 weeks. No one can stop you. So it just opens these floodgates as far as, who the gatekeepers are, the validation that is required. And I think it's going to take a while. It's obviously we can get into some like off the beaten path kind of topics here, but for people in control to like keep a certain level of productivity, to keep people pacified, then there needs to be some gatekeepers. So I don't think we're ever going to get away from it, but the portal is opened.
Absolutely. And I think, we talk about this in education, like a lot of the conversations that I have is that the role of the teacher should be shifting from, set aside the ego of the educator. You're no longer the gatekeeper, right? The holder of all knowledge. You're not the one who's holding all of it. And then it's your responsibility to pass it on to the child. Like, in my opinion, as we've shifted, you're now the one responsible to facilitate their access, their safe access to information, and then help them process the information that they're taking in. There was a book that was written a while back, and I can't remember the author, but it was called The Organized Mind, right? And the author talked about how, and this is maybe written 10 years ago, so it's different, but he was talking about, we take in about 700 newspapers worth of information a day. And if I were to be a guessing person, I would assume that that's dramatically increased since 10 years ago, right? So think about like what we've had to do to then process all that information. What's valid, what's not, what do we keep, what do we not? And then what that looks like for people who've never experienced that, students and that whole thing. But it's almost as if we've had to become our own gatekeepers in what we do. And we've had that conversation in previous episodes. What we've kind of drilled down to is, if I chose to work with you, regardless of the credentials that you had or did not have, because I qualified you for what I needed. So the consumer then is now the gatekeeper for qualifications, right? Which brings it to a whole nother like situation. Now what?
That's true. Yeah, the information is it's a buyer like market. It's the purchaser's market. You make the decision. You are gatekeeping. Yeah, it's so true how that translates to education, to any kind of purchase we want to make as consumers, that everything used to be hidden. All the information was hidden. And the person who was leading the classroom, the teacher, the school board, the whatever, or the company that was making the sale, they had all the information and they would make the decision. They would dole out the crumbs and take it. But now, you make the decision. And that's why I love the other shift of that too, is instead of worrying about making other people like you, instead of chasing that validation, instead of trying to get that approval, in my opinion, especially as an entrepreneur, the best thing you can do is to get really clear on who the heck you are, and to flip the know, like, and trust on its head and make sure that you know, like, and trust yourself and who you are deeply. And then just be yourself, share yourself, share your ideas, share your stories, share your approach. And people are going to select in and select out. Like, there's definitely reasons about me, my story, my lack of qualifications that made you think Rob is my person. But that also means there's other people who I probably wouldn't jive with, who were like, out the gate, they're like, no, Rob's not for me.
Oh, yeah.
That saves them time. That saves me time. It makes everything way easier.
Yeah, I agree. And that's kind of the same, like, speaking to like content marketing, right? When I'm working on my posts or whatever, which I never really considered content marketing, because when I started, I just kind of jumped off the cliff and was like, I'm probably going to lose my job, so maybe I'll update my LinkedIn. And, that's how it went down. It was never like an intentional, I'm going to do things, because, I get distracted. So when I started doing that, I had people coming back to me and saying, you're not being very professional. I would question some of the things that you're doing, saying, emojis and all of that. And even then, before I even like knew what I was doing, my response was still, well, then cool, because I filtered them out real quick. Solve that problem.
Exactly.
If you don't like my emoji, then we should not hang out.
If that's the thing that's going to break the relationship, and you know full well that it has a lot more to do with them and their concerns and their insecurities than anything to do with you.
Yeah, which is great because I have my own set of issues, and you handle yours, and I'll handle mine. And I had someone. I was talking with a friend over dinner, and he's unhappy in his job, right? Just not in the role, but in the environment. And he was like, I don't know, what's the best next step here? I just feel so overwhelmed by these things. I'm qualified to do this role. I could be doing more, blah, blah, blah. And many times when people engage in that conversation with another human, a lot of times they're looking for that human to say, oh, do these 4 things. Like, these are the steps you need to take. When my response is typically like, well, how does that make you feel? Does that feel aligned with you? And if their answer is, I don't really know, then I'm like, the very first thing you need to do for yourself is to figure out what feels aligned with you. Like, what would that be? And then chase that feeling. Because until you know you're looking for this, then you have nothing to chase. And using the emotional response as a qualifier, which could be dangerous, but I feel like if you know who you are and what you're looking for from your environment around you, it's becomes so much easier. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it becomes your compass. That's why really great coaches, especially working with someone who's never done these kind of exercises in the past, good coaching programs, will start with some kind of understanding your purpose, understanding your values. Like, what is that compass for you, so that it become your light that you follow and you make decisions based on that. And it's so funny hearing you explain that, people reaching out, they're hoping that someone says, here are the 4 steps, follow the recipe. Because if you think, like, the way education has been structured forever, the way employment has been structured forever, it's show up on time, bell rings, go to your workstation, don't go to the washroom unless you have permission, wait until the break until you do something. Like, the factory model and the elementary school model of they're perfectly aligned. It's to make great, obedient factory workers.
Right.
And it's evolving in some place, but so many of us have been indoctrinated through that. And the employee mindset is the same too. I'm going to show up, I'm going to do as I'm told, you're going to give me a payment, and that's our agreement. And it's this, the people who are messaging you like, oh, that's unprofessional, you sure you want to do this? I think this is a bad decision. This is sticking out because, you might get singled out. And then if you get singled out, you don't have a job. You might get centered out in front of the classroom. It's just a completely different approach.
I mean, and what's funny is they don't know that that's what I'm trying to do. That's the whole point, right? It's to kind of, mine is so, like, what I've really found myself wanting to do is like break these stigmas around so many different things, but around like someone has to tell you what to do. I think that's a huge thing for me, is because, I was given a very clear box. Like, my whole life, this is the box for you. You're a Christian, white, female, whatever. Here's your box, fit inside of it. And I never questioned the box because I never saw anybody else living outside of the box. Like, I was raised in this space. And it wasn't until recently where I started going, is my anxiety, depression, unhappiness, like hatred of life, could these be? Because maybe, and it was my coach months ago who was like, do you feel aligned? And I'm like, I don't understand your words. Like, what are your words that you're saying to me right now? And like, what are you saying? And, she had to walk me through that, because no one ever asked me, what does that feel like to you? It was always, how does that fit into these external validation points? And it took 6 or 7 sessions of her saying, do you feel aligned? And me being like, I don't know what you're saying. And finding out what that actually meant. And I talked with her this morning, and I said, I experienced something yesterday that was so success for me under my version of alignment that it blew my mind. And she was like, did you hear the words that you just said? And I'm like, I don't know.
What was that? Okay, we need to ask what that is. There's no way I can let you say that without asking what was it yesterday that made you feel so aligned?
I was sitting in a car with someone who's super important to me, listening to music with the windows down in front of the apartment that I'm about to move into. Like, this was success for me, right? And if you just say that, people are like, that's not, what are you saying? But they don't, I mean, what people don't understand for that is like what went into getting me to this moment and how impossible this moment would have been 6 months ago, 10 months ago, 3 months ago. Like, like what that felt like to then start moving in, this is aligned with me, so I'm going to make this decision and this decision, this decision, this decision. And then getting to this place and looking back and going, holy crap balls. What just happened?
Amazing. I love that too. It's a little moment. You're like, maybe some people that doesn't sound like success, but it is really the joy in the little moments. So you're making decisions, and sure, the windows down, the car, the music, that doesn't sound like a big deal. But if it's with someone that you're happy to spend time with, who is important to you, and it's an apartment the apartment's a big life decision. That means a lot behind that kind of a transition. So good for you. Way to go. Yeah, it's the same way to go. I'm saying, yeah, I totally agree. Way to go.
But I think, like, so for you in the work that you're doing, I don't know, for me in the conversations that I've started having recently, especially people who've been kind of bringing up this conversation with me with now that I'm talking about this unqualified, qualified thing, which has taken on a life of its own, like, what is it that you're finding is the biggest struggle that people are hitting up against when they're going on to, like, I want to take on this cool thing that I may or may not be qualified for? Like, what's the most common obstacle?
The bullshit they tell themselves based on the opinions of other people and the judgment of other people. And it's, I'm going to use your word. It's about dismantling that. It's about breaking that down. You call it a box. I've called it a glass ceiling. I definitely went through it myself. Grew up in a small town. Parents were from a certain socioeconomic status. Dad was in the army. People like me do this. People in my community do this. Like, you build this framework, or maybe you are indoctrinated into this container based on your family, your community, your church, or whatever, and you feel like these are your limits. So it comes down to that, and everyone has those kinds of limitations. And it's then a matter of questioning them. And then sometimes it's putting it like, okay, that scares you. Cool. Let's talk about it. Let's put a big spotlight on that fear. And let's ask 5 questions about that fear. And then people are like, whoa, look, you want to pretend it's not there. Or we can go knocking on its door, invite it out for a conversation, have tea with it, and realize that it's not nearly as big as you think it is, and you should probably move forward anyway.
Yeah. Oh, I remember when my coach was first like, let's shine a light on that. And I'm like, no, absolute. I am not trained for that. Okay. We will not be addressing that. But I think before you even get to that point, it's recognizing that, 1, there are questions to be asked, and 2, that you're allowed to ask those questions. Like, I think that is a huge thing. Is speaking for myself, I didn't even know that there were questions that needed to be asked, right? Because I was raised in a very, like, this is what it looked like. There was an outside world, but we didn't really engage with them, and so it was fine. But, like, 1, that there were even questions to be asked. And then when I realized that there were questions to be asked, then I had to give my permission to myself to then ask those questions, which was terrifying. And then allow yourself to hear answers that may not, jive.
I love it, because there's so many layers to that. There's all these steps, and you really have to, at each step, being like, oh, there's questions. Am I allowed to ask those questions? Like, you really have to work through it. And this is a point where it's making me realize and think that one of the reasons why I think I'm qualified to do what I do is because I am so traditionally unqualified. And I had this aha moment as I was making this switch a couple years ago to do what I'm doing now. And when I made the switch, actually, let me back up. 3 years ago, if we would have spoke, I would have said to you, I'm a creativity coach. I was working with creative people. I was working with a recording artist. I was working with someone else who's a photographer. I was working with creative people and helping them tap into their flow and their creativity more consistently. I started talking and posting a bunch about habits online. It had transformed my own life, my sense of confidence, my ability to get more done, my sense of self-worth, etc. So people started saying, hey, that's cool. Can you help me with habit stuff? And I was like, oh, okay. So then I started helping people with habit stuff. And when I went, live and boldly declared to the world on LinkedIn, like, hey, I'm quitting my secure director level 6-figure job. I'm going all in on coaching. And that's a whole other story. That blew up, turned into getting 20,000 views, and meant that I had to quit my job early because that like turned into its own separate thing. But what surprised me is a bunch of entrepreneurs showed up, and a bunch of people who were aspiring to be entrepreneurs showed up, and they wanted help. And I had to think, like, why is that? And I realized the things I identify with entrepreneurship and rebellious, like asking questions, answer, what do you want? I want to help the world in some way. But then I started realizing, oh, me struggling at school, me doing psychedelics as a teenager, me dropping out of high school, me starting a business instead of going to college or university, like me taking all these divergent paths, giving me a different perspective on things than those who have followed the orders of other people their entire time, have listened to parents, good intending teachers, bosses, whoever. And I'm not saying this in any kind of way, shape, or form with judgment, but if you do that for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40, like, how do you break out of that? And realize that my lack of qualifications and different perspective has helped me so much in being able to guide other people and shine lights in places where people maybe don't realize that you're allowed to shine lights, or those lights to be shown.
Yes. And, I always thought of myself as like somewhere in the middle. I always thought that I was asking questions because in my world, I was rebellious, right? I mean, I dropped out of high school and asked my mom to homeschool me because it was way too slow. Turns out I have severe ADHD. So that's fun. But I finished high school on my own, moved to Honduras, lived over there, came back, got married, took jobs that I wasn't qualified for, like excelled in those jobs, like all those things, right? So if you look at it from an outside space, I was rebellious. Like I was asking questions, pushing the limits, taking on things that I shouldn't have been taking on and all of that. But there was a whole other, like, under the surface level that I never even touched. And so I think there's always something more. Like every time you think that you're rebellious and you're asking all the right questions and pushing on all the right doors, you're like, oh shit, there's like a whole other like galaxy of doors and levels that should be pushed. There is no mountaintop.
I'm laughing so hard because of a conversation I had on more than one occasion with one of my favorite meditation and yoga teachers, and where I got to a certain place where I felt like I unlocked a new level and I was like glowing, and he was like, you're not even on level 1. Like, don't even, like, just there is always more. There's never any made it. And actually that's growth mindset stuff, which I know you're really passionate about, is this idea that there's always more to learn and more to grow. And so there's always more things to question. And there's, from a societal point of view, family, communities, there's so many layers. There's so many containers. It's Inception. There's containers in the container in the container.
That's so true. That's absolutely accurate. And I was listening to, you were talking earlier about like your privileges, right? You're white, you're male, all those things. You have an easy name. I was listening to a podcast On Purpose by Jay Shetty, which is like one of my very favorite. I know that's cliche because it's like the top podcast and whatever, but it's a great podcast. Anyways, he was interviewing someone I don't really know. His name is Scooter something, and apparently he's like a manager of like Justin Bieber and people who do things like that. I didn't know that. Anyway, he was talking about a journey that he was going on for himself and having to figure out the relationship with yourself and what that means and how it ripples into the people around you and what it looks like when you've lost touch with yourself and how to find yourself again. Like, he realized he was living in one version of himself and had left a whole part of him behind and had to go back and get it and bring it forward, which I feel like I heavily resonated with that, right? I was living in a lot of things that I was proud of, but there was a whole bunch of it that I'd left behind that I had to go back and get. And anyway, but he asked a question at the end. So this guy is, I don't know if he's white. I'm just guessing, right? I know very little, but I'm going to assume that he's white. He has an easy name. His name's Scott. He makes all the money, right? He's had a great career, blah, blah, blah. So he asks Jay Shetty, like, what do you do when people come to you and say your advice or your words that you're saying aren't valid because you don't know what I'm experiencing? Like, you have a lot of money, you have this, you have that, you have this. So there's absolutely no way that you can speak to me where I am and with what I'm doing because, you know, you have all of those things. And that's a concern for me. And I know in other conversations I've had, like, being unrelatable at some point to someone, which you're always going to be in some way. But, you know, do you ever get to this point where you're like, crap, I'm so successful or so this or so that then I'm going to lose that? That's kind of two questions wrapped in one, but I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on that.
There's so many different parts I want to go to that. So one, the relatability piece, I think, ties back a bit earlier to, like, some people are going to find you relatable, some aren't. There's nothing you can kind of do about it. And I don't think it's worth spending too much time from that point of view. Two, just because I'm in a good place now, I was speaking to someone else earlier, like, I'm in an amazing place now. I'm in an incredibly loving, supporting relationship where we call each other and consider each other care buddies first and partners second. I get up most days and I love my life. I look in the mirror, I'm proud of who I see. I'm making more money than ever. I can go through the list. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. However, I have carried so much debt that it was debilitating. I almost hung myself. I was molested as a child. I've been through a painful divorce. I've just because I'm in a good place now does not mean that I can't relate to things things that you might be going through. And then the last piece is, I think it ties back to what we were just saying, that if you realize and acknowledge that there's always more layers, there's always more to learn, more to grow, there's always more depth, and you're approaching life that way, and not about collecting resources, because that's all money is, collecting resources, then I think you remain a lot more relatable because you're always at that edge and trying to push yourself and going into uncomfortable situations and trying to learn and walking into situations where you are going to fail and screw up. Yeah.
I mean, the whole there is no mountaintop concept, right? I mean, like your teacher was telling you, yeah, you feel good now, but just you're not even close to where you're going to be. And I think, like, for me, I'm in a really good place as well. But if you were to have engaged with me several months ago, it would have been a completely different conversation. And then even prior to that, a different conversation, right? You're always different versions of yourself and how you're interacting with the world and all those types of things. But I think, you know, we gather our experiences and our resources and our relationships and whatever. And I almost think knowing that we're going to go into another drought or another struggle or another whatever, because without that piece, without the drought, without the struggle, without whatever, then you become stagnant. And, you know, that's not really what I want. And not to say you can only grow through struggle, you can grow through all types of different things. But for me, like, if I were to remain in a place where if I look back over my life and all the things that happened, if I remove like all the crappy things, then it would have taken me a whole heck of a lot longer to get here than, you know, had I not experienced those. So they're valuable pieces. And I think it's flipping the script on that. Like, how are you viewing the things that you're experiencing and the things that other people experienced and kind of where they are, and just changing the frame around it.
The huge difference. Yeah, I can fully relate to that, because the most impactful growth inducing like periods of my life were the most painful parts. And yes, in the moments it might have been really difficult and hard, and there could have been days, weeks, or months where it might have seemed kind of hopeless, but afterwards, like, I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't change getting fired from that job. I wouldn't change the divorce. I take lessons from that and apply that to how I move forward in life now. But yeah, how bland and boring would it be? You need the contrasts. And that's right. Like, how do you appreciate the highs and lows? And it's just about that's an important kind of perspective. It's a bit Buddhist as far as not attributing too much meaning to the highs nor the lows.
Yeah. And there's like a close friend of mine talks about like how the Stoic concept, you know, saved his life on multiple occasions when he was dealing with depression and those types of things, right? Coming into that mindset of everything is temporary, you know, and that's everything good is temporary, but everything bad is temporary. And like, it changes your perspective on, I'm in a really good place now. It is temporary. So what am I going to look like when I get to the next place? And it sounds dark, right? It can sound dark, like, come on, but it really allows you to see it in a bigger picture. And I think if we were to relate all of that back, like we've talked about before, your qualifications are temporary, right? So like, I got my child development degree. Honestly, I didn't get it until after I'd been doing that job for like 10 plus years. So I was a little late to the game. It's totally fine. But when I got it, this was August of 2019, it's probably already outdated, a lot of it, because research grows and continues. It was probably outdated when I got it because the research was happening, then they gave it to the school, then they gave it to me, and all of that. So like even your qualifications are temporary, and everything is about moving forward and continuing to grow and to learn and to evolve and never hitting that mountaintop.
That's a really good way to look at it too, that even those prestigious things that we think are going to make the difference, that people put in frames that we hold in such high regard, that they change and evolve too, and they get outdated just as quick.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Some people don't like to recognize that, but it's accurate.
I would agree. I would fully agree with that.
So if you were to kind of take what it looks like to be qualified inside of this crazy box that we've drawn around qualifications, like how would you describe that?
The thing I look for when I'm looking for someone who can help me, and whether that's things I've worked through personally or things that I'm looking to do from a business point of view, it is people who are where I want to be, people who have achieved something I want to achieve, people who have experienced what I am currently experiencing. For me, it's the equivalent of taking parenting advice from someone who doesn't have kids. Well, no offense if you're someone out there who works in early childhood education or is a child therapist and you don't have children, I'm not going to go to you. You could be good at your job, but you're not going to be the person for me. So that is, I think, the biggest thing as far as what I'm looking for. And just knowing that if you are sincerely analyzing and looking to interpret and get learning from and doing the reflection, then do you get your qualifications through life experience? It's a shame that wisdom in elderly people has been downplayed. Like if we look at European cultures, if we look at Asian cultures, look at places where they still really hold the family in high regard. It still happens in some religious circles, etc. But the elders were really important because the elders had lived through stuff. They'd seen stuff. They'd experienced stuff. That was worth a lot. And it's the degradation that's only really happened in the last 50, 60 years, thanks to advertising, thanks to marketing, thanks to them realizing that if you get a client when they're 8, when they're 10, when they're 12, when they're 15, and you get them as a client for life buying Colgate for their 40-year, 50, 60, 80 years, well, then you're going to make a lot more money. So much of the messaging that we've been bombarded with in movies and TVs and music and media has been about glorifying youth. Well, that downplays the importance of wisdom. It's so experience. That's why qualifications for me really come from experience. And coaching is an interesting thing. There's really great coaches I know who are awesome at asking powerful questions, at holding space, at leading with empathy and curiosity, and all these things that can make someone a really powerful coach. But I do think that having that layer of experience, of wisdom, of having taken, of tripped and fallen on your face, of had some screw ups, of that to me is real qualifications personally.
Yeah. I mean, the what could go wrong mindset gets you there.
What could go wrong?
From experience. Just jumping right on to that. Which was kind of like, did you itch your mouth?
I just poured water all over myself so that this flap was enclosed, and I look like I wet my pants right now. Sorry, not to cut you off, but
no, that's of all the things you could have cut me off with, please. I mean, it's not your ring light falling over, but that's second best situation right there. So I think like what you were saying earlier about quitting your 6-figure job and jumping into the other thing, that was a very what could go wrong moment of you, right? That was that kind of concept. And it's just slang for growth mindset. It's just slang for why not? I'm totally going to try it. And then if I fail, we learn something from it. But I think there's so many different versions of qualifications, and you've talked about yours is looking for experience as the other person have had. Mine is very similar. I think a lot of us are very similar because there's no mountaintop, everything's outdated. So I'm looking for you to grow. And my coach that I work with, whom I love and adore and hold in the highest regard of beauty and splendor, right? It's fine, it's totally normal. Someone asked me yesterday, what are her qualifications? And I'm like, I don't actually, I'm not entirely, she could have a degree. I don't know. And then I found out today that she was a psychiatrist in a previous life who worked with like autistic families and children and all these types of things. I was like, she has all the qualifications, but that wasn't what I was looking for. I was looking for someone who held space for me and created all of that. And cool, she has qualifications, but like, I just think it's very dynamic, and it has to remain dynamic because there's nothing static about the life that we're doing, and there's nothing static about your state of qualified versus unqualified, in my opinion. And I think that's really what I'm looking for inside of all of that.
Yeah, I like that a lot, the dynamic approach. Well, look, you have this really what could go wrong growth mindset, looking to learn and grow, especially if I'm imagining what you were looking for to make these kind of leaps. Like you didn't even know, like you didn't know there was questions to ask or if you had permission to ask them. Like, you just knew something had to change. So I'm sure you sought out someone else who is, when you spoke with them, interacted with them, realized that they were living a life where they're living and breathing that. They are taking this growth approach to life. They are always looking for the edge, and they are, they're living the no mountaintop kind of lifestyle.
Yep. Let's do that. That's a thing. All right. So now that we've fixed all the problems of the world, or at least laid them out for other people to figure out how to solve, you're welcome. Tell people where. It's fine. It's fine. Tell people where they find you to hang out with you and do the things with Robb Gilbert.
Wow. There you go. There's some points. Well, you can call me Rob G if you want. It's funny. You call me Rob G because career number one for me was running record labels, was being a DJ, was being a music producer, and my stage name, artist name was Rob G. So when you call me Rob G, it's kind of funny because it brings me back to that life. Yes. So if you're watching this now, you are very likely on LinkedIn, unless, I've cut this up or Chelsea's cut this up and we're repurposing it elsewhere. But LinkedIn is the place that I choose to play the most, where I'm active the most, where I engage with people on the regular. Other than that, I put videos out weekly on YouTube, and I'm also on Instagram. Although I don't push as much content out there, I do interact with people. So if Instagram's a place yours, I would say find me in one of those three places. Otherwise, Google is your friend. You want to use the old Google, and you type in my name, ROBBGILBEAR.
ROBB.
You'll find all this.
You have a YouTube channel?
Yes.
How do I not know these things?
Well, that's why you have me on your live, so I can tell you in front of a live audience.
Thank you. That's excellent. Excellent information. I'm going to follow it right now. All right. So thank you for hanging out. We have, again, had the whole conversation around qualified versus unqualified, took a whole different path than the paths we've taken before, which is super interesting. I'm now having people saying like, hey, I'd love to come on and talk about this qualified versus unqualified concept. So what started out as a mini series could end up differently. I don't really know, but I'm having fun with it. So, what could go wrong?
What could go wrong?
So thank you guys for hanging out with us. Follow Robb over here. He has a YouTube channel, cool information. I didn't know that. So that's exciting. Follow him, hang out with him, do all the things with him because he does cool things. And his pictures, like with his facial expressions, are really fun. So like that's really exciting. I'm really looking forward to you being on TikTok because I feel like you could have some really fantastic TikTok shenanigans, which I've jumped into the TikTok shenanigans, and that's been really interesting for me. So you should do that. Just fine. It'd be fine. We could do duets, which I just learned what that was yesterday. It's fine. We're done. All right, y'all. We're going to talk about TikTok later. I hope you guys have fun, and I will see you